Hi, my name is Kevin Mack, and this is another one of my videos to teach people about web design and web development. This video is about namespacing and naming conventions for your code. It's something that I use now on the framework that I wrote, all the projects that I've been doing over the past couple years, and it's allowed me to have more consistency from one project to another. So writing better code that's more maintainable, also more flexible and scalable, and becomes a way that developers know what the CSS does and the relationship to the interface that you're building out and the experience that you're making. So it's based on the naming convention or the namespacing that CSSwizardry.com wrote, which is Harry Roberts. And there's this great article, so I'm not going to read this line for line, but I'm going to walk you through what it actually means and how you can use it on your projects. And then I'm going to also show you this by an example inside the code that I'm writing. So inside here, they outline this O, C, U, T, S, L, or is and has, this underscore, JS, and QA. So each of these have their own kind of need or use case. So as I said, I've been using this on my framework that I built. So this is my open source project. It's called UIArc.io. You can see this currently on my GitHub, which is Nicetransition. And so github.com/Nicetransition. It's still in beta right now, but I'm working on doing the first version release. Really the only difference between now and then is updating this documentation for it. But inside here, all the code that we've written is actually based around those naming conventions. So they're prefixes for the code that you have. And basically what it does is it breaks down, it's an extension of ITCSS, which is another methodology that was written by Harry Roberts. And what ITCSS does is it's called the inverted triangle, but looks at far-reaching selectors and then narrowing them down to very specific needs. I'm going to be doing a later video on just ITCSS, but that's really in combination to this naming convention and ITCSS. It's a great way to maintain your code. And I just want to speak on the prefixes so people understand what they are. But if you look at like the code for what I have right here, I have this O container. The O stands for objects. And what objects are, they're really meant for structures. So objects are anything that doesn't have style to it, but things like grids, a container, or something that you would say, I want something to be here and I want it to move over here on small screens. So that's a container that you have. It's an object. It's related to object-oriented typography or object-oriented CSS. So really separating the skinning, the styles, and the structure itself. So objects are things like containers as well as grids. So inside my library, I have a bunch of them that are already prefabricated and built. I don't remember which link that I already have open, but I could even go to like my grid systems here and see how they're built out. So if I go to Flex, you'll see something that says like OFlex inside the code. What that is saying it's an object, unstylistic. And these are meant for structural pieces. Inside here, underneath that, we have then the C side of it, which C stands for components. And a component is something that's very specific and has a use case. A component is something like I want to create a tout or some kind of like shout out inside my experience. That has a specific use case. It's still going to be inheriting objects inside of it, but the component, anything that starts with C dash, means that you're adding specific styles just to that component, and you're adding CSS properties that extend things that aren't in your utility or object classes. The next thing inside here is the U. The U stands for utility or helper classes. These are things like colors or spacing or anything that changes the structural for it or helps support some of the stylistic pieces. So in the frameworks that I write and the UIArc, we include a handful of utilities inside here and different things like trumps, as they're called in ITCSS. But I have this wide range of colors that are based off of the color methodology that I wrote, as well as the typography pieces. But inside here, like identifying widths, sizes, if something's round, if it's a word break, text decoration, even speaking is considered a utility, but it's primarily anything that's extending a actual object to give it some style and look. So those are really, really important. And a lot of components I've built, they are first starting with the objects, and then I add utilities. And when I don't have the right utilities for it and I need something very specific from a CSS property or a way to identify or select that DOM structure, I create a component. A lot of times my components are something that literally just exists as a selector, so I can identify it if I ever need to. I reach out to it for maybe JavaScript reasons or to extend it at a later time. In addition to that, the next piece is this underscore. Well, I'll do the T. So T stands for the themes. So themes I don't use as much, but they're really, really helpful. Typically, I create maybe like 1 to 5 different themes for an interface. And what they are something like a background color with a forefront color. And maybe it overrides some of the header structures that exist out there or the button structure. So it's kind of like a helper class with some extreme overrides. Usually has a little bit more higher specificity, but what it does is it helps you identify a theme to it. And you can switch them out very easily from one theme to another. I use them in forms a lot, so like I'll have T form dark, T form light, or T form 1 if there's something like that. So a common naming convention, so I can switch from dark theme to light theme. The underscore is really meant for hacks or overrides. So say you're working inside of a platform and that platform itself has some really bad CSS code, but you inherit it. To override those, a lot of times you have to do hacks or increase specificity and battle against the CSS to make sure that your properties and the styles that you want are actually showing. So with that, you identify them with an underscore in the front, so the developers know that this is not necessarily the code you're proud of. It's code that you have to have there to support the interface and to override and overpower the actual product that you're integrating inside. JS dash is really identified for JavaScript related selectors. So these are things that you're using, like a trigger. So say I have a button, and that button, I click on it, it opens up the menu. For me to identify it, I put JS and maybe call it menu button. And what that means is I see JS and I realize that there's no stylistic, no structural need for it. It's just meant for the JavaScript to relate to my front end code. The last one here is QA. QA is a lot of times really for 2 purposes. It's meant for testing. So if you have different testing software, you can use QA, and it's just adding a selector so it can run through your tests in different scenarios. It also becomes a way to also identify metrics and analytics to single components. So that's what they're really meant for. But again, I'm building this all out in UIArc right now. It is on my GitHub. So if you do go to github.com and you go to Nicetransition, you will see that we have UIArc right here. Oops. UIArc right here. And the framework itself is kind of being built out here. So if I go to source, look at the code, I go to my SCSS folder. I'm breaking it down from global, brand, applications. I'll explain what those mean in a future video, but basically global are far-reaching. They can be used on any single project, is the core of UIArc. Brand means the theming layer. So adding, if a company or the project that you're working on has 2 different brands inside of it, you can still inherit the global, but then split off from the 2 brands. And application are very specific to a need. The example I always give is in banking, you may have your marketing site, but then you have your authenticated user site. There's going to be a lot of components, a lot of code, a lot of CSS that's related to one application, but isn't really applicable to the other one. So what it does is kind of breaks those 2 apart. But looking at global inside here, look at global core, and then if I look at my components, I have inline HTML written here, and this is used to create the documentations that I'm showing you right here. So it's a framework that I actually forked and then customized for this framework, and I may be switching that out, but you can see different things in here that are related to content blocks. So certain components that are reusable from one project to another, certain things like list stylings and all this really great stuff. The cool pieces here are if we look at the objects, and what I've done is I have objects, and I have objects containers broken down, objects list, object media objects, and objects grid. Each of these are then structured and put inside here. So I have object grid and I have object grid, which is actually CSS grid, which is built in here. So all the styles and different things that you could use for CSS grid are built into the framework, so you never have to write those. The same thing with floats are put in there. So a more traditional way, if you're working with legacy browsers, these should work, and just very clean. And then all the different properties that are related to flex and how to use them are also inside here. But you can see that the O inside here is doing that. And then the other convention that we've talked about in previous videos is this is following this naming convention, again from this article here. And I'll publish this in the write-up of this. I highly recommend reading this. But this is the naming conventions in the beginning, so the prefixes, so you identify what they are. And then they're being brought together with BEM. So to kind of give you a quick little demo of this, in my CodePen here, I have kind of this playground for UIArc, and this is where I can kind of play around and kind of show you how it works. So let me get rid of this. Say I'm building a structure. I can say O-container, which is my object, and then let's just put a container here. Let's just say an H1, and I'm going to say lorem2, and then I'm going to put a paragraph, and I'm going to say lorem 30. All right, so right now this doesn't look like much. It just looks like a base structure. Now, if I wanted this to be centered in the page, I could say O container wrap. And then I'm going to plop this guy inside here. And now you can see that's centered. So O container wrap is the structure that actually makes it be based around the max width and centers it in the page. So it looks like this. Let me increase my font size here. Now, one of the pieces that I said was components. So we have C-content block, which is something that's in the framework. And inside content block, I have C-content header. And then we also have C-content, content block main. And I forgot the block here. And what a content block is a structure that is meant for a header and then a main area and then a footer. So you'll see what this looks like here in a quick second. And it just has some base recommended structures and spacing sides. So now those are spaced out in between. Now, if I wanted to add this to a component, I could use one of the other things that are built inside here, which is my typography. So if I wanted this to be like my big font on my from my style guide and the framework, I could say C page header. And now we have C page header, which is the structure for this brand that I have. So this is bringing in the brand. UIArc is styleless, so it's a structure-based UI framework, but then it has a layer where you can add those theming and branding. So this is the theming and branding for this one. And then we also have a scalable of this, which allows it to shrink from small screens to large screens. But I'm going to stick on this one. And then at the bottom, we're going to have C-content block footer. And in content block footer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a button. So actually, we'll do it as an anchor. And we'll put 1, 2. And for this guy, and again, this is in the framework, it just says C button. And then I'm going to say C button primary. And we'll get the structure right here. And then C button default. C button. And it's been a while since I've looked at this exact instance of it, but I don't remember how I set this one up from the beginning. So that's my default button. It's not really that exciting here. I'm probably going to remove these two for right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a use space inside here. So that's one of those utility classes. You can see that I added space inside there. If I wanted it just to be on the sides, I have it on 2, 4, and I could say small. So it's smaller. If I wanted it large on the sides, I could do it on the sides that way. If I wanted it to be space on the top, I could do this. And if I wanted that smaller, I could do this. So all these are documented inside there. So that's a quick look at utilities and containers. Now, what I'll show you is an object. So I'm going to create a list here. And I'm actually going to duplicate this button. And we're going to have two. So right now, this is just an unordered list. Inside the framework, we're going to have view onList. So it goes like this. And then we're going to add an oFlex. And what that does is it puts it right here and treats this utility or unordered list as a flex. And then I can add different things inside here. So I can say like oFlex, justify, content, stretch, and it will go the full width. So I need to add this, use size 1. I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to say justify space between. I forgot the class is here. So it should do that. I'm going to have to reference my framework here. But anyways, this is treated as a flex. Now, if I wanted to add more buttons here, and I apologize about forgetting that one, and say we have these 3 inside here. To show you another one that's built in here is oGrid. And then oGrid goes that way. If I wanted it to be a 2-column grid, I could say o-grid 2. Now it's a 2-column grid that's doing that. And I could say oGrid 3, and it's going to space it out to be 3. If I wanted 4, I could have 4 there. So it starts looking at the structure and building these out. And then I have my framework that has all these other pieces. I could add a U primary BG. It's going to change that background color to the primary color. And I realize something's happening here. Let's fix these guys. Padding, so these are anchors. By default, they were inline. So I'm making them inline block so we can see them. Just because they're the same color, we'll change that background to the secondary color. I could also go like light, dark, and show a different background color side here. And then I could also say U space 1-3 large, and then have this guy here. There's a bunch of different things that I could be building out, but basically what I wanted to show today was these are objects, these are containers, these are utilities down here, more objects, and that's pretty much how they work. If I want to show a demo of a more robust version of this and how this all comes together, let's go to app offers, and I'm going to make the screen smaller. If I highlight this and look at inspect, you'll see the JS toggle right there, and that's what's related to my JavaScript to toggle this stuff. And let me refresh this. But that's what's happening right there. And you can see that the JavaScript is changing this. This page looks a little broken. Let me go back here and show you a better demo. Really 3 mess ups in this video. That's the fun part of doing these things live. But as long as you get the gist of it, that's all that matters. All right, so let's look at this guy. Again, inspect. We look at it, it has the JS toggle, and that's actually what my JavaScript is looking at and triggering that to do that. So I know from this, the JS toggle is the JavaScript side of it. I know from here, C menu is an extension of this button. I know C button are the defaults that are from the framework. I have a utility clicker that says don't make this smaller than a 40 by 40. I have a uglyph helper class, which is then related to the icon side of this. And then inside here, these are just all a bunch of different data points. So like even if I change this, you can see that, close this. This is an X right here. If I wanted to put one of my other icons inside here, I'm trying to remember one. Oops. But it's related to that, so now it's an I. I close it, goes like this. We'll go back to the menu side of it, and it's like this. And if I look at my code here, it's really well organized. The C menu component has just the CSS properties that are related to this specific thing, so overrides, but the rest of them are actually built from the framework itself. So very minimal CSS was written to create this button. These are the only things inside there, and I could have actually done these as the flex helper classes if I wanted to, but that's kind of just it. And then if I look at some of these like offer pieces that we have here, we have the C block offer. C block offer doesn't really have any styles associated with it. Again, it's just a way for me to identify it in my code. We have inside here the content block, which is the separating of these two. Inside here, we have the helper class of the auto, which helps it move that way. We have this header block name, which is again a way for it to connect to it. But again, these are all using stuff straight out of the framework, and very minimal CSS was actually having to be written for this, which is the beauty of what UIArc brings, but also kind of an understanding of what all those pieces do and don't do. So in short of it, what this video is about is the namespacing of components, and I showed you that through a quick demo. Showed you a little bit of UIArc, which there's going to be a lot more on that coming. But O stands for objects, so it's identifying anything that's an object. C stands for a component, something that has specific styles associated with it. I still use them as a way to identify and select it in my DOM if I need to, or if I need an override at some other time in the future. JS is identification for a JavaScript selector. QA is for metrics as well as for any of your testing platforms. And then T is for theming and anything that's stylistic that you want to drop one thing in and override it. And then lastly, the U is for utility and those helper classes so you can extend your framework. As I said, this was going to be a little bit shorter of a video. I showed a lot inside here, so I'm sure there's a lot of questions. I hope I didn't confuse anyone with what I demoed. But if you have any questions, please hit me up on Twitter. I'm Nicetransition. Leave comments in the video. I'll respond to them. And if I need to make a video that's specific about one of the items that I talked about in this video, I'm more than happy to do it. And if you reach out to me, I will respond and try to respond as quickly as possible. So I hope this was helpful. And again, let me know if there's anything that people want to be learning.